Hey everybody, I'm meteorologist Ryan Hanrahan. I want to give you an update on what we've got happening in the tropics. A lot of people are curious about Tropical Storm Erin. There's been a lot of chatter on social media, online, all over the place about this storm. So the question is, where is it going to go and how strong is it going to be? And well, we don't quite know the answers to all those questions yet, but I'm going to do my best here to sort of separate the fact from the fiction and let you know what we know and also what we don't know. So let's start by taking a look at the storm right now, because this morning is a little disorganized. It's lost a lot of the big thunderstorms that had fired up yesterday. You can see we've got this swirl showing up now on the satellite loop. This is the visible satellite loop. So a well-defined circulation here, but it has lost those big, tall thunderstorms. And so until those redevelop, the storm is sort of going to have a tough time strengthening a bit. And they will redevelop. We're almost very certain that this is going to continue to strengthen as it moves across the Atlantic, but at least for right now, sort of in a steady state. If you look at the motion here, so we sort of track it along these last few frames, it looks like it's going due west or even just a little bit south of due west. So it's no longer gaining latitude, and it's no longer getting any farther north, and that's going to be important with this storm as it moves across the Atlantic Ocean. Here's the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. You can see the center of Erin is right here. Wind still 45 miles per hour, so again, hasn't strengthened overnight. It is expected to strengthen, though. In fact, by Thursday, the National Hurricane Center has the storm as a hurricane, and by Sunday, the National Hurricane Center has Erin as a major hurricane, a Category 3 or greater hurricane to the north of Puerto Rico. One thing to note here is if you look at the cone, the southern extent of the cone, it now includes parts of the Virgin Islands and also parts of Puerto Rico. So that the track has come south just a little bit. And the question is that a trend, or is that just sort of a wobble to the south? So that's something we're going to be watching. Again, most likely the storm is north of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but it's a bit of a close call. So we'll be keeping an eye on the storm as it moves to the west, because again, it is expected to strengthen into a pretty significant storm. This is one graphic that I really like, because this sort of explains or puts in context where the storm is right now and how many storms that have been in that position before have gone on to impact the United States. And so this is developed by a friend of mine, Bob Hart. He's a professor down at Florida State, tropical meteorology professor. And you can see the storm here. There's the center of Erin. And it's fairly far to the north. In fact, if you look at the scale here, only 5 to 10% of storms that have been in this position have gone on to make landfall in the United States as a hurricane. So the odds of a landfall, just based on how far north this storm is, are fairly low. If the storm is farther south, and significantly farther south, then it would have a greater chance of making it all the way west into the United States. And so right off the bat, this storm sort of has a bit of a disadvantage or an advantage, depending on the way you look at it, of curving out to sea before it's able to get to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's what we call climatology. That's basically looking at storms that have passed in this area before, and generally, what do they typically do? Generally, they typically go out to sea. So that's what we've got in terms of the climatology, but we need to look at the meteorology to see what's going on in the jet stream, in the atmosphere, what's able to steer this storm around. So what we're going to do here, we're going to look pretty high up in the atmosphere. We're going to look up at about 20,000 feet or so. Those are the steering currents that exist. So that's the start of the jet stream. That's going to allow the storm to either continue off to the west, or if there's something to pull the storm north, that's what's going to happen. So when we're trying to figure out where a storm like this is going to go, we want to look at the steering currents in the atmosphere. We want to look at where the jet stream is and try to figure out, okay, where is the storm going to go? How quickly is it going to move? And what are some things we need to watch out for? So this is a look at the European computer model. I'm going to show a couple of these. They're all in fairly good agreement with this. It's not like we have these really gigantic model discrepancies here. This is the center of the storm. It's moving over the open Atlantic, and I'm going to go through time here to show you what happens. So if you look to the north of Erin, see this area of orange where it says 594? This is what we call a ridge of high pressure, and that ridge is steering the storm to the west. That ridge is preventing the storm from moving to the north, and so that ridge exists right on through the end of the week. So here's the center of Erin on Friday, still with that ridge to the north. So we're still preventing Erin from moving farther to the north because of this block. The question is, how long does that block stick around? And if you take a look through time, the block begins to weaken by this weekend. So by Saturday, this is Saturday midday, you can see the block is sort of gone. There's not much of a block anymore to the north. Here's Bermuda, that tiny little speck of land in the open Atlantic Ocean. And notice there's nothing to the north to prevent it from turning to the north. So what does it do? Well, it slowly starts to gain some latitude, and it follows that weakness where there's no block, and it curves out to sea into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It actually gets caught up in this big gyre, this big upper level low over Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and Labrador. So that scenario would keep the storm out to sea to the east of the United States. Could be an issue for Bermuda, but wouldn't be an issue for the east coast of the United States. This is the AI version of the European model, which actually has been doing fairly well. And you can see as we take a look at the track here, same deal. Here's Erin moving to the west, that ridge to the north, blocking it. The AI model gets it fairly close. It's on the southern side of the guidance envelope, gets it fairly close to the Virgin Islands and over toward Puerto Rico, so we'd have to watch that. And then as it continues to the north, it finds that weakness in the ridge and again begins to curve out to sea, although it gets a little bit closer to North Carolina and the southeastern U.S. So again, this would be a miss. This would be a curve out to sea, which is what we want to see. The GFS computer model, same deal here. Here comes the storm. It's trapped by that ridge initially. That keeps it on the westerly heading. And then as it continues off to the west, it finds that weakness to the north over Bermuda, and the storm turns to the north, heads toward Bermuda, and then eventually gets caught in the jet stream and goes out to sea, well to the east of the northeastern United States. So that's the general trend here. What could change? Well, one thing we're going to have to watch is, does that ridge hang on longer? Is that ridge able to sort of hold itself together to the north of the storm? If that were to happen, that could effectively keep the storm moving farther to the west. But most of our computer models, at least right now, aren't showing that. This is the spaghetti model plot. Each line here represents a different computer model, and so where they're all clustered together, we've got a really good idea of where the storm's going to go. When they begin to spread apart, it's a little more uncertain. It's a little more unclear where exactly the storm will go. But if you look at these computer models, they almost all take the storm to the west and then curve it to the north of Puerto Rico, to the north of the Virgin Islands. This is a look at some other spaghetti model plots. Lots of spaghetti here. That's a good meal today, I guess. This is the GFS computer model, and notice it's taking the storm to the west, curving it to the north. There's two outliers out here toward the Bahamas. So these would happen only if you had that stronger ridge to the north, where you get the storm continuing on a westerly course a little longer. This is the European computer model. Same deal, although there's a few more of those outliers a little bit farther to the south and west. So something we'd have to watch a little more closely. But, out of all 50 of these different tracks, almost all of them are out to sea. Just one or two sort of brush the coast. And so if you're looking at the probability of this, it's a pretty low probability of the storm getting to the southeastern United States or the east coast of the United States. Not impossible. It could happen. You got to watch these things, but at least for the time being, our computer models are in really good agreement that the storm's going to go to the north and curve out to sea, potentially near Bermuda. And one of the reasons we're watching this so closely is because it looks like this could be a fairly significant hurricane. It looks like it could become a Category 3 hurricane. That's what the National Hurricane Center is projecting. And this is a look at our computer models' intensity estimates. And you can see starting off here about a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm and continuing to strengthen. All of these lines show this a general upward trend as the storm moves west. It's moving over warmer water, so you'd expect it to begin to strengthen. And so, we get a pretty sizable hurricane by early next week. And so, again, we're hoping it's to the north. The farther north we can get this thing and move it out to sea, the better. So, again, here we are. We're keeping an eye on Tropical Storm Erin. I wanted to give you a little bit of information, a little bit of context, a little bit of better understanding of what we're looking at with this storm as we're trying to figure out exactly where it's going to track. The question we've got over the next couple days will be, does the storm track a little bit farther to the south? If it does, that could bring it a little bit closer to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And then we have to watch the jet stream. We have to watch that big blocking ridge to the north and our computer models weaken it and show a weakness developing, which would allow the storm to curve out to sea. And so we'll be keeping a close eye on that. As long as we can get that ridge to break down and sort of give the storm an escape hatch, we'll be in better shape. Although the one thing I would note is that we do have the potential for some pretty big swells and rip currents at the ocean beaches starting early next week, maybe as early as Sunday, but probably not until Monday or Tuesday of next week, as close as Watchell, Rhode Island, out through Cape Cod, and all the way down the eastern seaboard, probably down to Florida. You're going to see an elevated rip current risk with some dangerous swells moving west and northwest from Tropical Storm, soon to be Hurricane Erin. So we're going to keep you posted with this storm as the storm moves a little bit closer, but at least right now it's something to watch, but it's not something to be overly concerned with, as again, most of our computer models keep the storm offshore and out to sea to the east of the United States, the mainland United States, and right now north of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, although it does get a little bit close by the weekend.